sense. But the main four, I'll cover those for you in no particular order. The first is something we call a fumarole. Now, if you've ever spoken or do speak Spanish, fumar is to smoke in Espanol. So a fumarole is a vent where you're going to see, quote, smoke, but it's not. It's the steam that's coming up from underneath. It's going to have a very interesting odor. It's going to sound like sulfur dioxide, or smell like sulfur dioxide, which of course is that lovely rotten egg smell you all know and love. And you're going to smell that in a variety of places through the park. Not harmful, unless you're planning to put your head over that steam vent and breathe it in all day long. You're not going to have a problem. If you are particularly sensitive, respiratory-wise, just beware. But I don't think it's really going to impact you or affect you in any way. But you will definitely catch a whiff here and there. Now, fumarole happens because in the cracks and fissures and places where water and snowmelt can get down underneath and make its way to those hot rocks, just enough water hits those hot rocks that it doesn't accumulate. But just like where you would throw a little water on your iron or throw a little bit into your skillet to see that it's hot enough, and the water kind of bounces around and really almost instantly turns to steam, that's what's happening here. So when that water hits those cracks and finds those hot rocks, it turns into steam and comes right back out. Some of the water comes in such a way as it is a constant. Most fumaroles are constantly emitting that stream of steam. So it's not on again, off again like a geyser would be. You're going to always see that steam rising out of those fumaroles. So again, just water that hits the rocks but not enough to accumulate, turns it instantly into steam and right back out it comes. You're going to see hot springs. That's the second type of geothermal feature. Some of these can be very beautiful in their color, and that's because there's either dissolved limestone or dissolved silica, or a combination of both, that will give that water some reflective properties and will give it a very lovely blue-green kind of a tinge. There's a couple of places, in fact one in particular, where you'll be standing right next to a very beautiful spring. So there'll be a couple that will drive by and you'll be cursing me under your breath, if not over your breath, but I promise you that you'll be standing next to a couple of springs right up close and personal to look at as long as you like. That'll have those beautiful, lovely colors. A hot spring, as you might imagine based on the description of a fumarole, is a place where there is more water and it collects more rapidly than it can be steamed out. Now, the hot springs are going to be mostly steaming. And by the way, if you see bubbles in those hot springs, they are not boiling. It is gas underneath the spring that is kind of like blowing bubbles with your straw and your chocolate milk, right? The air is coming out, or the gas is coming out from somewhere below the spring and creating those bubbles. The highest temperature of a hot spring in this park, in a certain area that quite honestly I'm not sure we'll get to with our schedule. Again, it's not in your brochure, so I'm not worried about it. But we'll reach about 175 to maybe even 185 degrees. Now at these higher elevations, the boiling point does drop from 212 to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, but they're still not boiling when you see the bubbles. On average, the temperature is 165-ish, but still way above what I set my jacuzzi at, which is about 103, 104. And you're not going to want to get into any water that's much above 104, 105 at the absolute most. So as inviting as they might look, not only are they hot, they are acidic. And there are some terrible tales of people that have stepped off trails. These are all true. I shouldn't call them tales. They're true stories. People that have stepped off trails, found the ground a little too late, realizing the ground was too thin to support them. And there are springs who knows where. And that's why they have built those trails. And people smarter than us, smarter than me anyway, have put those trails in places that are safe. But they don't guarantee your safety anything other than on those trails. Of course, even there, you got to be careful you don't trip and fall and all that stuff. Nothing arduous about it, but just be aware. You never want to step off either it's a blacktop trail or a boardwalk trail on this park, because you just don't know what's underfoot. That said, you'll see a bison walking by who weighs 2,000 pounds and wonder, how does he know where to step? The wonder of nature is my favorite answer for that one. They somehow know. Like animals somehow know when a tornado's coming or an earthquake coming, and they all of a sudden take cover and they start running, and you say, uh-oh, maybe we should too. The bison must know. I am not aware of any incidences where bison have fallen through. I am aware of at least one that must have lost its footing and fell over a waterfall. And for good or for bad, that carcass was there for most of that particular season. A teachable moment, and it wasn't all that awful and gross to look at. That's my only experience with bison that have met their fate by the natural occurrences in the park. Of course, they could also meet their fate, with bears and wolves, but usually the bears and wolves are only going after bison that are not well. that aren't keeping up with the herd. Sometimes the babies, they get away from their mom. So you heard me say earlier today, speaking of bison, that somebody tried to pet the fluffy cow. My wife sent me the link to the video. I haven't opened it yet, but I know what it looks like. And there are videos in some of the visitors centers that play on a loop to show you what can happen. If it were not for the source of the 720-degree tumble that the guy did, I would have thought that was very impressive for the Olympics. But considering it was a bison that flipped him through the air 2 or 3 times before he landed, it's a lesson to be learned. So don't get close. I know I'm repeating myself there, but I want to make sure you do that, or don't do that. And again, you'll see some videos, and maybe I can pull up that link later and show it to you. But we don't need to see it. We know. Some deer. Thank you. Very good. Okay, so fumarole, hot spring, mud pot. Now, a mud pot is really not too different from a spring, but what makes it different is the water that is in there is usually much more acidic, got much more sulfur in it, and I'm spazzing out here a minute in terms of the official chemical name. It'll come back to me. But the sulfuric acid, for lack of a better way to put it, content in the water eats away at the edge of where the spring is. So it may start as a lowly spring and just water, but if the acid content is high enough, it will start to eat away at the rocks and the dirt around it. Certainly not overnight, but it will start to eat away. When dirt falls into water, what do you got? Mud. And of course, these mud pots will have varying thicknesses or levels of viscosity as the season changes. Early on in the season, and again, you won't have a way to compare unless you come back in August, but early in the season, the mud pots are going to be a little thinner than they will be as the season goes on and it gets drier and there's less snow to melt. It also depends on how much rain we have during the summer season, and the amount of moisture, amount of precipitation, I guess I should say, is what dictates the thickness of the mud pot. Some are super thick, even now. And as the summer progresses, they will get a little thicker. They too kind of bubble up, sometimes can splash, even as far as to where you're standing on the trail. You're not going to melt away. It won't be like a James Bond movie where you start to sizzle and, you know, all of that. Just again, these are just words of caution. Always be aware. The beautiful thing about national parks is we certainly have access to them, but they are natural and they are unforgiving in certain areas. So you'll need to be cognizant of that. So watch the mud pot splashes. Then there's the geyser. And so that's the fourth geothermal feature. This is a little bit different in that the water collects, not enough room for it to form a spring, but it collects down beneath the surface of the earth, and then finally the pressure builds to the point where we have an eruption. Now you're going to see Old Faithful. It is going to erupt. It hasn't let us down for the 150 years the folks have been coming out here to Yellowstone. It will erupt about every 90 minutes, give or take, plus or minus. It's not scheduled, it's predicted. Okay? We never really know the exact time, but the Park Service is pretty good, and when they give us a time for eruption, and they always say plus or minus 10 minutes, and about 90 to 95% of the time, they are within that plus or minus 10-minute range. So that'll help you plan your time at Old Faithful in terms of when you want to hang out to watch the eruption. Now, we may get fortunate. All the rest of the geysers in the park, some have a sort of predictive schedule. Again, I don't like to use that word. Some, we just don't ever know. There's a geyser here in the park. I think it's Steamboat. I'll have to look it up. It's been dormant for years, but has lately been erupting now and then, but not in any way that we can predict. People that are really, really, really into this and want to get photos of it will literally spend the night on the boardwalk waiting for these things to erupt. Of course, if it erupts in the middle of the night, I don't know how good their pictures are going to be, but they're probably prepared for that. And so they hang out until they go. There are some geysers around the Old Faithful area, tons of boardwalks there, tons of opportunity for you to actually get your steps in for those who want to do that, and you'll have a variety of springs and geysers to see there. There are a couple of geysers in that area that are a little bit more predictable. I say a little bit more, because there's one geyser in particular that usually they'll give you a time and they'll go not plus or minus 10 minutes, they'll go plus or minus 12 to 24 hours. So not the kind of thing you can hang around and expect to happen like you will for Old Faithful. Old Faithful is the most predictable geyser in the park. It is by far not the largest, tallest, biggest geyser you will ever see in the park. These other ones that I mentioned are less predictable, are actually much more powerful and much more interesting. And hopefully we'll get a chance, maybe our luck will be such that we'll see some other geysers in the park. Now I mentioned that fifth geothermal feature. This is up at the Mammoth Hot Springs area, and what these are called are the travertine terraces. The travertine is a form of rock that's got heavy amounts of limestone in it, and you will not see that feature anywhere else in the park. Now, I mentioned very briefly the plumbing system. That's, a nice, easy layman's way of talking about what goes on here in this park, and it really is. That water is flowing all kinds of different ways underneath us and coming out in the various places. Kind of like those prairie dogs, only it's water. And it's, making its way this way and that. There are some that say, and we're talking about the scientific community, that say there is a single water system, if you will, or pipeline system under the park. But because of what you're going to see at the Mammoth Hot Springs area and these travertine terraces that are mostly limestone, there is another school of thought that says, well, maybe there is a separate plumbing system that's apart from all the rest of the park that creates this sort of feature because the water is so heavily concentrated with limestone particles. That water comes up out of those springs out there by Mammoth Hot Springs, and as it flows across the surface, leaves particles of limestone behind that actually start to collect into these terraces or little stair steps, big stair steps actually, you'll see that. And it's the one place in the park that if you were to go there, say today, and then come back as early as say next week, you might well find things just a little different than what you saw them the week before. The terraces actually start to build up very quickly, but then when the water changes direction, it starts to build up in a different part. And so there are places in the park where I was keeping an eye on the last couple of years, but for whatever reason, the spring that was feeding that area is now gone dormant, or the water's coming out in a different place now. Something as silly as a debris pile, a stick, a bunch of leaves, that diverts the path of the water will stop the growth of the travertine terraces in one area and make it start in the other area. And when I say little, you'll be able to see little spots that are just yay big, that are starting to rise, but then when the water changes direction, nothing happens there. Now, when I tell you like this, when you see those travertine terraces, that you're going to have the opportunity for those that want to do it, to actually walk from the top of the terraces back down to the parking lot where the bus will meet you. More on that tomorrow morning, because that's what we're going to do first thing tomorrow, once we get up there. And when you walk down those terraces, you'll get a very good feeling how big they are and how much limestone is involved. And again, the only part of the park that you're going to see look like that. So I guess I do buy into the idea of saying it is a fifth type of thermal feature, but it's been created by hot springs, which is one of the four thermal features. So you could go either way on that. Again, nobody's going to take points off whether you call it 4 features or whether you call it 5. You'll get to see all of those things. Now tomorrow, one of the things that we'll do once we get back into the Old Faithful area is go to a place called the Fountain Paint Pots. Fountain Paint Pots is a very special place because within a very short walk, and I'm talking 45 minutes, mostly level, a few stairs, I think most of you will be able to do it with no problem. You will see within a very short walk all 4 of those geothermal features very nicely put together in one little spot for us. So you'll see a very beautiful spring called Silex. You'll see a mud pot, that's the name of the area it's called. That mud pot is called Fountain Paint Pot. Actually tends to have a pinkish hue to it, which is really kind of neat. You'll see fumaroles, and you'll see a geyser that is to my knowledge, the big park. Haven't been everywhere. But in my travels, it's the only geyser that I'm aware of that erupts continuously. And I'm not even sure I can explain the science behind that. The water comes, the pressure is such that it's like almost like somebody's got their thumb over the garden hose, and it just keeps going. It's called clepsydra, which is Greek for water clock, and of course that's an idea that it does go around the clock. So when you're at the Fountain Paint Pots tomorrow, in one fell swoop, you'll see all these things.